Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this webinar again. Today, as you know, we have Roger Moore, Professor Moore, but I have to tell you that we have already agreed. So the three next webinars in March, April, and May. So you are all invited to attend these webinars. And today it is my very, very pleasure to introduce Professor Moore. In fact, he doesn't need a presentation in the field of speech and spoken technology because he's been like more than 40 years in this field. So he was first the head of the speech research unit of the UK government and a founding member now of Sheffield Robotics. He worked as a head of, since 2004, he's been professor of spoken language processing at the University of Sheffield. And he's also visiting professor at Bristol Robotics Laboratory and also in psychology and language science of UCL. And he was president of the ISCA association, the International Speech Communication Association, until 2001. And then he was distinguished lecturer. He has organized many conferences and workshops. He was general chair of Interspeech in 2009. And well, he's editor-in-chief now of Computer Speech and Language and member of the editorial board of several journals, Speech Communication and other journals. He was awarded in 2016 the LREC Antonio Zampoli Prize for outstanding contributions to the advancement of language resources and language technology evaluation within human language technologies. And also in 2020, he was given the ISCA Special Service Medal for service in the establishment, leadership, and international growth of ISCA. So it's our pleasure to have you here, Roger. I will give you the floor, and we are all looking forward to your presentation. Let me see how I do this. Sorry, there are too many participants here. Let me see. I cannot see that. No. Hi. Sorry, I cannot. Moment. Hi, por favor. Here it is. Okay, sorry about this. Opa.
Okay,
you did it, Arit.
well done, well done.
Some other one. Sorry
No
about
problem.
this.
No problem. Thank you very much, Inma. Thanks for the nice introduction, and thanks for the invitation to speak to you all today. It's a lovely opportunity. I must say, I'm really, this is one aspect of the whole pandemic which is actually working out very well, isn't it? I'm sure you've enjoyed lots of presentations from people who might otherwise have difficulty traveling, and it's working very well. So thank you for the invitation. It's very nice to be here, and I hope you enjoy the talk, get something out of it. And thanks to Aritz, by the way, as well, for making all the arrangements and the technical side. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be talking about, talking with robots. And you may notice there's a subtitle, are we nearly there yet? So I'm going to be looking very much to the future and asking about the feasibility of entering into a realistic conversational interaction with an artificial artifact. But before we look forwards, let's look back a bit and remind ourselves. I mean, you just heard the embarrassingly long time that I've been involved in the field. But that does give me a nice perspective on everything that's been happening. I mean, it's amazing to me to see where we are today. You know, when I started, automatic speech recognition was barely getting going. We could just about build devices that would recognize a few words. And if you think about where we are today, it's absolutely phenomenal. So some of those early systems, nevertheless, even though they were simple, they found application and they were used in what are called command and control systems. So the idea is that, you know, hands-free operation of equipment by just issuing a command with your voice, you could get something to happen. And a lot of those early applications were more in the military than in everyday life, of course. And then in the late 90s, dictation systems appeared. What that means is the companies like Dragon Systems released software that you could install on your PC, which would allow you to create a document just by talking. And this was the first appearance of large vocabulary recognition systems, and it was a staggering thing to suddenly see the technology out there in the marketplace for ordinary people to use, because up until then, you know, most of that technology was sitting in labs, and we didn't know when it would hit the market. But 97, very significant. Then we went through a period where a lot of systems were deployed on the telephone for accessing services, the dreaded IVR, interactive voice response systems, which people grew to love or hate, because they weren't working brilliantly, and anybody with a strong accent often had difficulty getting the service that they actually wanted. And then relatively recently, in 2011, Apple surprised everybody by bringing out Siri. So we entered the era we're in now, basically, which is voice-enabled personal assistants. Not just Siri, but then, of course, a few years later, Amazon brought out Echo. We have a lot of these now devices in our homes and on our phones. So again, it's to someone like myself who spent many years grappling with this technology in the lab, it's amazing and very satisfying to see that it's out there being used by ordinary people. So as I say, that's where we are now, and looking forward, we're starting already to enter a new era where we're getting conversational agents or embodied conversational agents, echoes, which might be avatars, agents that appear on your screen, sort of cartoon-like artifacts which you in principle can interact with. And then ultimately we get to autonomous agents or robots. And that's really what I want to talk about today. So let's pay attention to robots. But I just want to emphasize the progress. It has been absolutely staggering. And we've, in something like automatic speech recognition, where the criteria for success are quite clear, which is the accuracy with which you can transcribe speech. We've seen over the recent years some of the big players, the Microsofts, the Amazons, and what have you, Googles, slugging it out in what I like to call word error rate wars, where they're basically claiming and counterclaiming, you know, not just as good as a human, but you know, arguing with each other about the last 0.01% improvement in speech recognition. And this has just been amazing to see this battle going on, claiming better and better and better recognition. And the similar thing's been going on in speech synthesis. I don't know if you're aware of this, you probably are, but Google brought out a very high quality synthesis system, which was able to phone somebody up and enter into a dialogue. And I'm going to play this. So this is the test of the audio. So I don't know if I can't see anybody, but maybe somebody can put a thumbs up. if they can hear the audio. So this is a recording of that was distributed a couple of years ago when Google, as I say, had this automatic system which phoned up to make a reservation. And so the service provider is a real human being, and the inquirer is the automatic.
So how can I help you?
Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
Sure, give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, what time are you looking for around?
At 12 p.m.
We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15.
Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have a 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. is fine.
Okay, what's her first name?
The first name is Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
So there was quite a bit of controversy when that came out because although it's an impressive piece of technology, a lot of people were suspicious that the whole thing had been set up and that the person receiving the call was actually expecting it. But hopefully you noticed, I tried to interrupt, but of course they were talking, the ums and ers that were being synthesized by the system, creating a kind of a very naturalistic interaction there. So this is absolutely amazing. And then when we come to these devices, we've got phenomenal numbers of systems which are actually available or being used. Tens of millions of Alexas sold over Christmas period in 2017. And then Apple, 41 million active users in the same period. I mean, this is just absolutely amazing. So let's just quickly summarize where we are. So what we've been seeing over a large number of years now is pretty much steady year-on-year progress with the performance of speech recognition and speech synthesis and dialogue, what have you. And that's a good thing. So why is that? What's been going on? Well, one thing, there's some very simple answers here. One is that computers have got more powerful, so we can run algorithms that we could only dream of 20 or 30 years ago. Of course, as always, speech is at the forefront of machine learning. Speech is such a hard problem. We've always been using the latest machine learning techniques, and that's continuing as I speak this very minute. And we're also using huge training corpora because obviously for machine learning you need data, and some of these systems now are being trained on enormous amounts of data. Hundreds of thousands of hours, millions of hours of speech data. And the other crucial thing is that our community has been benchmark testing. And we have some standard tests, many standard tests, and many competitions and challenges. And so basically everybody knows what the latest algorithm is capable of doing and how it compares to other algorithms. So that regime has been in place for 30 odd years now, and I actually had a role in kickstarting all of that, and so it's really having a big effect. So that's all fantastic. Now, what I also want to say is that you might think, and it depends which community you're coming from here as to your view here, but you might think that we might be making progress because we understand a lot more about spoken language and how human beings do it. And I would say that that's actually not true. All the improvements are coming from the things I mentioned just a moment ago. You can't really argue that anything that we know about human spoken language has had a big impact on any of this technology. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm marking as neutral because it depends which community you're in as to whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I'm marking it as neutral for now. However, let's pick up on a couple of other ideas here. One is that it's because of the nature of human spoken language, it's very easy to underestimate the complexity and the power of this very special faculty that human beings have. And that can lead to some issues. So that is an issue I'm going to pick up on in a minute. And finally, a lot of the technology is marketed as tapping into a natural ability to talk. Well, of course, as human beings, we do have a natural ability to talk, but not to machines. We have a natural ability to talk to other human beings. And that, it turns out to be an issue as well. So I'm going to focus on these two areas here. So first of all, the richness and complexity of spoken language. We're talking about robots, so I also want to just say Alexa, which a lot of people have experience with, or Siri, or these assistants. They are not robots. And a robot may or may not be a personal assistant. Robots are physical devices which operate in the real world physically, and they perform physical tasks, and they can move around in the environment. Alexa and Siri cannot do any of this. Or they just give you access to the web, basically, or some data sources. So the first thing to appreciate is that if we're anticipating interacting with robots, we have to appreciate what a robot is and what it's capable of. Okay. And then I want to say something about speech. Speech is not just another way of interacting with a physical device like a robot. A lot of people in robotics just tend to view speech as a nice additional channel. It's much more interesting than that. And now I'm going to quote something. You'll see this on the front page of my website. It's a combination of quotes from Richard Dawkins and Pat Cool. Spoken language is the most sophisticated behavior of the most complex organism in the known universe. So until the aliens land, outside our labs and we have to converse with them, we do not know of any other behavior that the human brain being the most complex thing that we know, and it is the most sophisticated behavior that human brains seem to be able to perform. It is not just a simple communication channel. There's something very interesting and different about spoken language. So the implications there are that if you think that in order to have a conversation with a robot, all you have to do is grab some state-of-the-art speech technology and graft it onto a state-of-the-art robot, you are not going to be satisfied. Just creating an artifact which talks and listens is not enough. We have to do a lot more to integrate speech and language with physical artifacts like robots. So I don't know how many of you here are speech people or language people or into this, but I'm just going to take the liberty to remind you that speech is a very interesting phenomenon, and it's not just text spoken out loud. And I'm going to expose you now to a Sheffield accent. As I hope you can hear this, let me turn the audio right up again, in case that's a problem. So I'm just going to play now some conversation between human beings, and they happen to be in Sheffield because it's taken from the BBC. Has an archive of different accents, and you may know that the UK is famous for its wide variety of accents. So hopefully you can understand what's going on, but brace yourself for a fairly strong Yorkshire accent.
You speak normal English with a slight Sheffield accent, and you speak dialect. If you were annoyed, would you go into dialect or would you stay in straight English?
I go into dialect. I go into dialect.
Why?
Oh, I don't know. It's just something in me. Just
when I get angry, I go, why is man getting me angrier?
He will stay in Sheffield and get mad, but I revert. I don't know why. I just use my dialect because I don't know. It's like when my parents. It's probably got it from my parents because when they got mad, they flipped into their dialect as well. So it's probably I just took it from them. But I prefer it. I prefer it for some reason. That's me
Is
why.
it something about the way are you able to express yourself better?
Yeah, yeah. Less words, but they get to the point quick.
Okay, so I'm sure that was challenging for a lot of your ear brains, but that's the point really. Perfectly natural human conversation, lots of people all talking at the same time, but I'm now going to pull out various bits and pieces that you may have noticed, but I'm now going to draw your attention to them. So here's a little snippet. So I don't know whether you noticed that little behavior there, but that particular speaker started the word Sheffield, changed their mind, made a slip, and then said it again. So there was a repetition. Perfectly normal behavior in speech. Reflects the planning. There's a lot of arguments and experimental evidence that suggests this is actually, there's not something going wrong with speech. This is actually helpful for the listener, because the listener then perceives that the speaker is trying to decide exactly what they're going to say. More things come out of people's mouths than just words. That's part of the interaction, part of the conversation. Laughter, other noises, they're beautifully integrated into the interaction. They're not some quite separate process. And there we have just a simple word, why, spoken in an incredibly expressive way. So just transcribing it as why would not be enough. If you really want to understand what's going on in this conversation, you've got to appreciate the emphasis and the extra effort that's going into that particular production for communicative reasons in the conversational context. I love that. Just noises, again, noises. The guy is wanting to speak. He's letting everybody knows that he intends to speak, but his brain hasn't actually decided what it is he's going to say. So he keeps his turn by just making some speech-like noises. A repetition. Indeed, more words. Okay, so I just want to, these are just normal phenomenon, which if you just treat the speech as text, you will be almost be ignored. And when you're listening and to a conversation or engaged in a conversation, you don't even notice these things. This is just part of the fabric of the communication. So speech has a lot of aspects which are particularly interesting. And I don't have time to go through this long list. I'm just trying to impress on you that there is a long list of features which are exhibited by spoken language, which typically are completely missed in just a textual form, all of which are important in a communicative context. And talking of communicative contexts, we're often faced with situations, those people, there are a group of people in a relatively quiet environment, but lots of spoken language communication doesn't take place in a benign environment like that. It takes place in busy places. There are many individuals. You have to pay attention to certain individuals. And imagine a robot thrown into this situation, having to figure out who it is they're supposed to interact with, not just by speech, but the whole scene. Who's where is my conversational partner? How do I engage? So many crucial issues, which are all part of the way in which we as human beings manage our conversational interactions, our spoken language interactions. Okay. So, all right, well, that's fine. Lots of problems there. That means loads of research, lots of interest for us academics. Why would we want to talk to a robot in the first place? So I just want to now give you some ways of thinking about this so that we can tackle it, as a research problem. So first of all, I emphasized earlier, robots exist in the physical domain. So that means one reason for talking to a robot is that we can get physical support, we can get mechanical support. because they're in their domain, physical domain, with objects and actions. Things can happen, things can be picked up, things can be moved, and we might engage with a robot in order to help us do things like that. Okay, so that's the physical domain and providing mechanical support. There's a second domain, which is the social domain. So this is much more about who's there and the relations with that we have with those other agents. Agents may be living agents, may be non-living agents like a robot. And we may be, what we can get in the social domain, of course, is something like emotional support. We can be encouraged or discouraged, or so this is different from the physical domain. This is now providing support in a social domain. And then the third area is a more abstract domain, which consists of sort of knowledge and data. This is pretty much where we are with Siri and Alexa, right? They're providing cognitive support. They're giving you access to things which you wouldn't otherwise have access to in terms of information. So there are lots of advantages in using your voice in these three different domains. You can do things hands-free, you can do things eyes-free, you can manage joint attention, you can gain empathy. Speech is a very high rate information channel compared to just pushing a button or typing, for example. So there's lots of advantages which cuts across all these different domains. So there are a lot of good reasons why we might want to talk with a physical agent like a robot. Okay, fine, but how? How do we talk with a robot in these different domains? Well, the physical domain is going to be very much kind of command and control, which is a phrase you heard me use earlier, very much going back 20, 30 years or more. In order to get physical support or mechanical support, then we're probably going to be using our voice to garner cooperation and to issue commands, help me lift this sofa or something like that, right? And in the abstract domain, where it's all about information, knowledge and data, then it's going to be more Q&A, questioning and answering, very much like Alexa and Siri is. But in the social domain, this is where we get to see things like actual conversational interaction, dialogue, negotiation, and managing relations. Okay, so this is how we might talk to a robot, and this has implications, and these are the implications, because the command and control and the Q&A are pretty straightforward. This can be done using what I call formulaic speech acts. So it's possible for a person to learn a relatively modest set of functions in order to use or access the mechanical support or cognitive support from a robot. And I call this voice button pressing. It's a very old-fashioned idea. This is where it gets interesting. When we're in the more of the social domain and conversational, now we're talking about languaging in its full sense. And this is where we start to hit on all those challenges that I identified just a moment ago. Which is why we are seeing applications in the physical and abstract domains, but struggling to solve some of those serious problems in the social domain. All right, so I mentioned languaging. So let me just reiterate really what language is all about. And of course, a lot of people describe the ways in which human beings converse as a simple sort of turn-taking stimulus response behavior where one person speaks, the other one answers, and backwards and forwards. But I just played an example of some multi-party conversation, and it's clearly a little more interesting than that. So this is an old-fashioned idea. The more recent and more insightful view is that languaging is more like a coupled system where individuals involved in spoken language interaction are a bit like, I don't know if you have this game, it's very popular here in the UK at schools on their sports day, and it's called a three-legged race. I don't know how international that is, but it's a coupled system. And the fun in this is that you really have to align yourselves in order to be successful. And that is a very, very strong message about what language is like. And it's not like nobody has thought of this or realized this. So I just want to draw attention to what's called the incremental approach to dialogue. Some of you may be familiar with this, which is something which has been pioneered by the people at KTH in Sweden. And the idea is that rather than a dialogue system being this sort of tennis match to and fro, a much more fluid, coupled, interactive arrangement. I've got a little video here of this in case you're not familiar with it. So this is just somebody entering a credit card number, but in a very fluid way based on incremental processing.
253.
Okay.
145.
Sorry, do you mean 1 and then 40 and then 5?
No, 145.
Okay, 145.
Yeah, and 684.
Okay.
712.9.
So, from the start. 253.
Yeah.
145. 664.
No, 684.
Okay, 684. And then 712.9.
That's right.
A few years old now, and there's been quite a nice little research community growing up about incremental processing, not just incremental dialogue, but incremental recognition, incremental synthesis. And I highlight that as a very worthwhile area where some important work is being done, which needs to be done because it's really grappling with a fundamental property of spoken language, which is often overlooked. So, language and languaging. What are we saying here? We're saying that the sophistication of language is that we've got this continuous dynamic coupling. It's kind of synchrony between people, and it's two-way. And the point about coupling means there's feedback, and the feedback is continuous. It's a continuous process, and that's what allows people to do what's called distributed sense making. And there are many definitions of language, but I particularly like this one, which is saying that the key components are these two things in the middle here: ostensive, inferential communication. And the word ostensive is very interesting because that's about knowing that you are being communicated with, which is something that a lot of speech-enabled robots have no idea about. So they just enter into the world where people are talking, and they don't. And how do they attract attention of an individual if they're in a group? So even that is a very under-researched area. And then recursive mind reading. It seems that language is very much founded on knowing what the other person knows, knowing their background, and and using that in inference. And I'm going to come back to that in a little while. Meaning itself, some of the latest ideas on meaning suggest that it's heavily grounded in metaphor and grounded in the physical world. That has some very interesting implications from a robot's point of view, but very little research going on that particular area. And ultimately, the emphasis should be on pragmatics rather than semantics. In speech processing, we tend to work bottom up. So we're very concerned with recognizing the words and doing that very accurately, and rather less concerned with, but what's this person trying to do? What are they trying to achieve? If you're familiar with systems like Alexa and Siri, we've got these word intention now being liberally used as if it's meaningful. And it's, intentions are important, but the way that they're implemented right now are a travesty in terms of the reality of how human beings are expressing their intentions in the real world. And there is an implicit assumption that the conversational partners are both human beings, and therefore there's huge shared priors. So language is founded on, appears to be founded on all these rather important things. Okay, so that was just to addressing the complexity and how easy it is to underestimate and therefore get a rather trivial and simplistic solution when in fact the reality is so much more interesting. So now I want to talk about the second problem, which is that it's not natural to talk to a machine. I'm going to refer back to a slide that was given to me some years ago by a friend and colleague, Mike Phillips, who actually set up SpeechWorks many years ago. And he gave me this slide, and I really like it because it's basically looking at progress in development of the technology and picking up two really important axes here, which is the vertical axis is usability. So what can you get done using voice? And then the horizontal axis is how flexible is it? How rich? What's the variety of things that you could get done? And what he's pointing out is that essentially simple structured dialogue, command and control, if you like, is obviously the bottom left-hand corner. You can't say very much and you can't do very much. Whereas interacting by voice with a human being is, in some sense, the top right-hand corner. You can do a lot and it's incredibly flexible. Okay, and so what Mike pointed out is that Siri, when Siri appeared, the big advantage, as well as it being integrated into a telephone, into a mobile phone, and having location-based information, what have you, but also it added some natural language processing and some dialogue, and that took us on the way. So that was much, it could do more things, and it's more flexible than just a simple command-based system. So the question is then, okay, so we're on our way. Where are we now, and how long until we get up into that top right-hand corner? So this is the Mike's curve. Now, you'll notice we've got an interesting curve here, and what Mike was pointing out, and I agree, and I've got data on this, is that somehow as you make a spoken language system more complicated by adding more sophistication, in other words, making it more flexible, the usability actually plummets. People don't seem to know what to do anymore. They don't know how to use it. And there's lots of evidence for this from things like Siri and Alexa that I don't know how many of you own Alexa or Siri, but I can pretty much guarantee that, the flexibility is huge, but I bet you only use one or two things. What's the weather, set an alarm, simple things like that. I almost guarantee that none of you use the full range of facilities that are there, and you probably have no idea what they are. And it's very interesting, as an aside, Amazon send out an email every Friday to all Alexa owners saying, oh, you might want to try this, you might want to try that. They feel obliged to alert people to what you can do. I mean, that would be very odd from human interaction, wouldn't it? So I've labeled this the habitability gap, which is it's a term from HCI actually, and it rather nicely captures the idea here, which is that this interface is not habitable. It's not easily usable for some reason. And so let's put the languaging business here. So stimulus response is very much what we used to, or the simpler systems can do. And we've already seen that talking to a human is this wonderful coupled synchronized arrangement. And then in the habitability gap, we've got this horrible disaster where one of the partners is happily traveling and the other one is causing all kinds of problems. And basically the system collapses. Okay. Now, probably many of you are into robotics, and I'm sure when I put that up, a number of you thought, hold on, I've seen this curve before. And here it is. This is the Uncanny Valley, which I'm hoping that most of you will have heard about. Indeed, it does look very similar, and I'm claiming that it's actually the same thing. It's exactly the same thing going on here. So for those that don't know what the Uncanny Valley is, what you're seeing now is a graph of robots of various degrees of human likeness on the horizontal axis. So we've got on the left an industrial robot which has no human likeness at all, and on the right we've actually got a person. And then we've got this familiarity vertical axis. And this guy, Mori, way back in 1970, pointed this out as a hypothesis, and it's been much researched. And the graph basically shows that as you create an artifact which becomes more and more human-like, rather than people liking it more and more and more, you get to a point where it is actually rather repellent, and people have a negative, very negative reaction. And the difference between the solid line and the dotted line is that the solid line is for a still artifact, and the dotted line is when you have something which is moving. In other words, the whole effect is exaggerated. So there's a lot of evidence for this. I'm just showing one example here. So this is some work by a colleague of mine in the States, Carl McDorman. He's done a phenomenal amount of work on this whole business. And this is typically what's done. This is actually on faces, but he's morphing between a robot and a human and showing that you get an eeriness in the middle. And this one is a particularly interesting study. There aren't many like this. This is showing what happens if you mix a robot face in a human face with a robot voice or a human voice. And it shows that if you get them the wrong way around, a robot, a very mechanical looking robot with a human voice, or a human being with a robot voice, that is perceived as eerie. That's a really important result. So I actually I got quite involved in this. I was on sabbatical a number of years ago in the Bristol Robot Lab and did some work on this and discovered that although there's lots of empirical evidence, nobody had come up with a kind of an actual model or a mathematical model. So if you're interested in that, you can read about it, but it's basically based on categorical perception, and it's a Bayesian model. And with that, I can successfully model these responses, especially this negative uncanny effect. And the hypothesis that the model puts forward is that it's to do with category uncertainty, and that when you have when you have mismatched perceptual cues as to the identity of an artifact, then that is a recipe for creating what I call a perceptual tension, which could be itself perceived as as uncanny. In other words, it's a signal to say there's something not quite right here. You might want to run away or do something. So it's all about conflicting perceptual cues. So this has immediate implications for creating an agent which we're going to talk with, like a robot. Because what this theory tells us is that in order to not have the uncanny valley, we need to minimize those conflicting cues, which means we need to align affordances. So that means what a robot looks like, what it sounds like, how it behaves, what it seems to know, and how it's interacting, communicating, all has to be lined up in some meaningful way. This is back to what I said, you can't just randomly take bits of component technologies and glue them together. It has to be a coherent overall design. The other implication here, if these things have to be lined up, given that we have different states of the art in our abilities, our technical abilities on these different dimensions, then we're limited by whichever of these we're doing the worst at, and that is typically the cognitive stuff, right? But so we might have, we might be able to make fantastic human-sounding voices, but if the thing doesn't know anything and it's not a human, that is going to be a problem. So we need to back off on the voice. And this is now me jumping on one of my soapboxes, and it's I've been saying this a long time, and it's a very unpopular view. But here we go again. What this tells us is that if we're going to start to create artifacts we're going to talk with, they should have, and they're mechanical artifacts like a robot, then they should have mechanical voices. They should have an appropriate voice for the artifact. That will go some way to mitigating the problems caused by this uncanny valley effect. And why? Well, because if we can reduce uncanniness, that tells us that we're going to increase attractiveness, and that's going to increase rapport. And that's a key factor in the social domain that I was talking about a little bit earlier. Okay. And at this point, I just want to throw up, if you like this kind of idea and you like this stuff and you're into speech, I'm just advertising a book by my good friend here, Bruce Ballantyne. And I love this book, and I particularly love it because of the title. It's better to be a good machine than a bad person. And a lot of the speech-based apps that people are putting together are trying to be essentially arriving at being a bad person and putting users in a position where they really don't know what it is they're interacting with. Okay, so much just sort of hand waving, but I do have some results here just quickly. I don't have time to go into this, but tested this with mechanomorphic voices and shown that people respond in interesting ways to robotic voices and are able to cope with that quite nicely. And they simplify their interactions, which is exactly what we want because we don't know how to deal with the full complexity of language yet, exactly as you would, as predicted by the theory. And just as an aside, actually, literally as an aside, I think you can probably see behind me this robot here. I don't know if you know this robot. This is Miro or Miro, which is actually a robot out of our lab here in Sheffield. It looks like a dog, but it's not a dog, but it is a mammal, or it's supposed to be. It's a biomimetic robot. It's supposed to be a small mammal about the size of a small dog. And it actually vocalizes, and I designed the vocalization based on all the principles that I've discussed with you just now. So rather than just pre-recording some noises from an actual animal, or just arbitrarily sticking in some kind of weird sound synthesizer, Miro vocalizes an appropriate sound for a mammal of this particular body mass. I'm not going to go into this, but I've written a couple of papers about this. I've got a generic mammalian vocalizing system which can be set up for all kinds of different animals, as you can see on the left there. So I'm just, there's a small video now just of Miro making a noise. So it's not going to speak, right? It's just a small mammal, doesn't know any language, but it is going to make appropriate noises given its size. So what I meant to say just before that started is to pay attention to the vocalization, because it was going from a very positive emotional state to a negative emotional state. It liked being stroked, but it didn't like the loud clapping, and the vocalization was changing to reflect its internal states. And that's all within that generic mammalian model. Okay. So now we've got some theory. We can design artifacts. We know we've got to line up the affordances, and we might be able to create something which does not create an uncanny valley and any difficulties. However, I did allude to this earlier on. Spoken language is normally between human beings, and the interaction between human beings is founded on shared experiences, priors, right? So what does that mean when we're talking about mismatched interlocutors? When we take a human being and some artifact or something which is not human, what does that mean for the interaction? Maybe, you know, if we have mismatched interlocutors, then we're not going to have shared experiences. We're not going to have the same priors. And if language is founded on that, we might be up against a real barrier here. And it comes down to really simple things like, you know, how do the users know what they can and can't say? And maybe actually this is another part of the whole habitability gap idea. And relatively recently, Tom Scott Phillips has this very nice book, Speaking Our Minds. I can recommend it, which is about language. And he says the assumption of a continuity between fully coded communication system at one end and language at the other is simply not justified. So we may have a discontinuity. It may not be a continuum. We may not be just making continuous progress towards the ultimate speech, spoken language based interaction with a robot. We may actually have a serious problem here. Now, we are used to talking to, talking in a mismatched situation, right? So adults talk to very, very young children, people from different cultures, different linguistic backgrounds, people with disability. There are many situations where there is a mismatch. And so maybe that can be, you know, maybe some of those will give us some insight in how to bridge the gap. But these are all still human beings who are able to bridge this gap. And so maybe we won't get too much out of that. What about this? People have very satisfactory conversations, vocal interaction, speech-based vocal interaction with animals like dogs, especially dogs. And that's an area where we might encourage a lot more study to really figure out what's going on here when we have a major mismatch between the interlocutors and yet a very effective cooperative interaction with some spoken language in there. And it's, you know, it's not collapsing in the way that the Uncanny Valley collapse seems to occur. Okay, so I'm going to wind up in the next couple of minutes, just the last couple of slides now. Multimodal communication. What I want to do now is just give you a way of thinking about all this and in the way that the implications. So human interaction is almost inevitably, almost always multimodal. And the different modes of communication have different information rates. Some aspects of communication, like poking somebody with your finger, is a very low rate channel, and spoken language is a very, very high rate channel. That's right at the top. So we have a huge set of possibilities as human beings available to us. And here they are. You know, we've got gesturing, pointing, body pose. All these things impact on communication between individuals, and they can be characterized on this information rate scale. So when we're interacting with, we've got two people interacting, they're sort of matched in this sense. Now each of these people they have an individuality, they have personality, they have some demographics, they have some culture, in other words, lots of priors and backgrounds. So even if we have a simple monomodal human-human interaction like texting, those things still exist, right? So even though we're using a narrow channel, those properties of the interlocutors are still there, which means that the guy on the left, the person on the left, can bring a lot of priors. They know about themselves and they are assuming that others are similar to themselves, and the same thing's going on the right. And this all works very well. So it's possible to interact using language monomodally, very efficiently, with another human being. Because there's all this inference going on, right? And that inference is perfectly, because we're using priors, because we know we're dealing with a conspecific, that inference is pretty accurate. Now, when we've got human-robot interaction, first of all, the information rates are lower because we just don't have the full channel bandwidths available to us yet. The person still has all their characteristics. And what about the robot? Does it have any individuality? Well, not if you're buying one off-the-shelf robot. There's a zillion of them. Does it have any personality? People working on that. Demographics, what does that mean? Culture, what does that mean? So this person interacting with the robot now has got a problem. They're trying to bring these priors to bear to do the inference, but they may have had no experience of dealing with a robot before, or one other robot. And what about the robot? What do they know? Yeah, big question there. People working on it, of course, but pretty slim. So the person is going to be inferring some stuff which may or may not be right. They may be completely wrong estimate of what's on the right-hand side. In fact, there's nothing on the right-hand side, and these inferences are completely misplaced. Now, I want to make, I use this slide on a meeting on trust, because as well as human-like bodies, faces, and voices, all of which are kind of faking. It's very easy to fake emotion, fake empathy, fake understanding, fake sympathy. You can program all these things into the robot, but they are not real. They are pretend. What that means is you're actively deceiving the human being, because the human being is going to make inferences and can be completely confused now as to what this entity actually is. Okay, so I think this is literally now one slide away. I just want to finish by pointing out this very nice paper here by long list of authors, because I want to point out that a lot of what I've been talking about to do with particular use cases of robots where people are socially engaging in conversational interaction. There are many other human-robot interaction situations where some of these issues don't matter. So I appreciate that, and I'm just flagging that up in case anybody's concerned that I'm a blanket spraying my opinions over every conceivable use case. I'm not. There are certain use cases here which are the ones that where language really comes into its own, where we do have these problems. So here's the bottom line. We do seem to be missing something fundamental in our science of interaction in general and vocal interaction in particular. We don't even know really how animals do simple vocal interaction, let alone human beings, and then language on top. And if you're interested in these sort of ideas, I actually started a series of workshops under the heading of VIHAR, Vocal Interactivity in between Humans, Animals and Robots. We've had 3 international workshops now. We had one just last summer, over 200 people registered. So lots of people interested in these overlaps between and some of the more fundamental principles that are going on, that we seem to have developed amazing technologies founded on very little in terms of fundamental principles. So are we nearly there yet? If we're going to get to next generation language-based interactive systems, we need to have a much deeper understanding of user behavior. Embodied systems need to have this continuous, adaptive, multimodal, incremental, closed loop coupling. Tennis match between a robot and a person isn't going to work. The affordances have to reflect their actual abilities, and they have to be lined up. And we need to really understand how language might work at all when we've got mismatched agents. And in the end, we're also missing any measures of success here and what it means to be usable. Easy for me to put up a graph saying more or less usable, but how do we measure that for a language-enabled system? That's it. So if you want to know any more, you can easily contact me and find me. There's a chapter in a book here called From Talking and Listening Robots to Intelligent Communicative machines, which covers quite a lot of what I've said in a bit more detail. And that's it. Thank you very much. Bang on the hour. I hope I've left enough time for some questions. Thank you for your attention. Shall I stop sharing?
Yes, sorry.
If
Thank you very
anybody's still
much.
there.
Thank you very much, Roger, for this very interesting talk. Oh, now is the time for questions. We have very little time for questions. So there are no questions in the chat.
No problem.
Is there?
Everything must be clear.
Oh, it's very, very sad that we really couldn't hear your very well your examples. The volume was
Yeah, it's
extremely low.
in Zoom, of course, there's a thing you click which makes sure the audio goes through, but with other platforms, it's very, yeah, sometimes works, sometimes doesn't.
Yes, so I think you have to share some, so switch on something in the application. So why do you think? So you said at the beginning that we haven't learned that much about language and about science or speech science in all these years. No? But however, we are able to, in speech synthesis and speech recognition, advances have been huge. So why is that we are still lacking this knowledge about interaction or?
Well, I mean, we were, it's not that I didn't say we're lacking knowledge. I'm saying that the knowledge in the speech sciences has not been deployed on the speech technology side. It's not had the big impact that you might expect. In the early days, it was assumed that the best way to create this technology was to somehow bridge the gap between the speech sciences and speech technology. However, the modern era of machine learning has overturned that and basically said we can just collect data, phenomenal amounts of data. We can train up our algorithms. They do interesting stuff. We don't need to know anything. I mean, it's particularly disturbing to me as because I teach our main speech processing course, and for example, a large part of that course is speech signal processing, and even something as fundamental as doing a Fourier transform, these latest systems are end to end. They work from the waveform right through. There are experts on speech technology out there who do not even know.
Well, they still
Some
use
of those,
and
they don't need that. They feel they don't need to know. It's a very
yes.
interesting world we're entering right now, where actual knowledge seems to be becoming devalued. I think this is a problem.
Yes, we have a couple of questions. I don't know, maybe Valentin wants to make the question himself. He says in the chat, it is not a risk to embody a robot with full speech capabilities in the sense you propose as a target. Wouldn't they be out of our design control? Can you read the sentences in the chat?
No,
in the chat, you have a chat symbol at the very right
yes.
end.
It's just giving me the option to send.
Maybe it's not in Apple. Because you have a
It's giving me an option to send a message, but I can't see anybody else's. Oh, hold on. I've just seen another button. Here we go. Let me just make it bigger.
So there's the question from Valentin Cardeñoso. Maybe Valen, do you want the floor? Maybe I can give you. This is so difficult.
Is it okay? Is it not a risk?
Valentin, I think you
I'm
can
grappling
talk.
with the negative there. To embody a robot with full speech capabilities in the sense that I propose.
He cannot open the microphone. Okay.
Okay. I'm not sure I fully understand that question because of the negative. So are you saying it's what I'm proposing is risky or what I'm proposing is not risky? Full speech capabilities. Yeah, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with exactly which way you're going with that question, Valentine. I'm sorry.
He says, in the sense that it would give them a very high human-like nature. Yes.
Well, yes. I mean, that was kind of the point, wasn't it, at the end there, where I was saying that if we fake, but if we create artifacts which appear to be human-like, but inside they don't have all the nuances and the priors and all the things I was talking about, then we are basically performing a deception, and that is ethically wrong. And I'm just noticing now. So, Louis, why are we improving TTS systems to be more natural if they're not suitable? Yes, that's exactly my question. Why are we?
For assistants.
The answer is because it's a simplistic view to say, first of all, we have a target, and people seem to be very happy with the idea that the aim is to make a speech synthesis system as, quotes, natural as possible without thinking too much of the use cases and the implications. But I did say when I was talking about that part, my view is a minority view. I've been campaigning for this for a long time, and a lot of people in the mainstream business think, well, we don't want low quality voices, and that misses the point completely. It is perfectly possible to have a very, very high quality and yet robotic voice. You've only got to watch, any sci-fi film or what have you. That Hollywood knows how to do this, and yet our community seems to be determined not to grapple with creating the richness of voices that we know is possible. So yeah, I think that is a question. Why on earth are we doing this? And I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but why isn't there a fairly large community pushing for creating voices that are appropriate to the artifacts on which they're going to be deployed? That is my simple argument, really.
Well, I don't know if there are more questions in the chat. I cannot see it anymore.
Here from Vincent
See the
Chang.
chat anymore. Oh my God.
Has there been any?
Because I am sharing the last slide. I was preparing for. So can you tell me if there are questions in the chat?
There's one at the end. Oh, yeah. I'm not alone. That's very comforting. Thank you.
Okay, now I can see it.
There is a last question from Vincent Chang. Has there been any ASR robot system that can help students interactively correct their pronunciation? Yes. I mean, there's quite a lot of work going on speech-based systems for automating pronunciation correction in computer-aided language learning, CALL. I actually have a PhD student working on exactly this. And we've done work in Sheffield on this. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of publications on this, but whenever you have a robot, you've got to, I remember the first day I was on my sabbatical at Bristol Robot Lab. The very first day, the head of the lab came along and said to me, the first question you have to ask in dealing with robots is, why do we need a robot at all? Why a robot? And that's why I emphasized near the beginning of my talk, what it is a robot is, what it can do. And it's a physical entity in the real world. So if we need physical support, then we need a robot. But, we shouldn't just have robots because they're fun. Well, I mean, I'm not against fun, but what I mean is that shouldn't be the driver unless that is the aim. You have to ask in this particular context, why would you need a physical entity to help you with your pronunciation training when an online system dedicated to that might be perfectly fine. One of the other aspects of robots that I didn't mention is that they're phenomenally expensive because they're not mass market products right now. And so people are happily saying, oh, yes, we're going to have care robots in people's homes. No, we're not. They're just outrageously expensive. And they go, they don't hardly, they hardly run for any length of time. The largest, the most deployed robots in the world are the Roomba vacuum cleaners. And, that's the level of sophistication we've got to with robots out there as consumer products. And all the Boston Dynamics and what have you, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get one of those. And so they're not going to come along and, make a cup of tea for you in your old age. So, there's a bit of quite a lot of hype, quite a lot of overemphasis. And the point that I was trying to make throughout my talk is that there's a lot of really interesting fundamental questions, research questions, where we still don't have the answers. And if we had some of those answers, then maybe we could create.
This is me.
Oh,
I
right.
had to
Okay.
cut the vocal cords of my
Oh, yeah.
Roomba
Okay.
because I couldn't
I thought you
stand.
were talking about me then. I thought, oh,
No. About the Roomba, about the robot, Roomba, my Roomba robot. I had to really kill the high speaker because I couldn't stand the talking of this.
yeah.
It was terrible.
Uh,
There's another and last question. Any ideas on how to overcome the gap of shared knowledge, culture, pragmatics in the end, between human and robot?
Simple answer, no. I mean, there's a data-driven answer, right? Which is that the robots. Well, I mean, one advantage of robots is they can be replicated, and so you can do. What is one robot is equivalent to 1 million robots, and so 1 million robots could be out there gaining phenomenal experiences, and that can all be pooled and then shared. So there's lots of interesting, different ways of doing the learning. But is that ever going to be the same as the sort of shared knowledge and culture that human beings have? I mean, right now, the most important thing that's missing is the knowledge of the physical world. And that's a big difference between a robot and Alexa. And there are people working on robots that are actively exploring the world and trying to learn about the physicality of the world. So that you would expect a robot ultimately to have a perhaps even more detailed understanding of the physical world than you or I. But how far that goes to facilitating language-based interaction, don't know the answer to that. Interesting research question. That's the kind of thing I think people, some people should be thinking about and working on.
Yes, there is another question.
What kind of fundamental research questions in the middle of saying earlier that should be answered, pursued? I'm wondering what precisely that's referring to. What kind of... I mean, I was hoping that some of the things that I said in the very last slide was listing the fundamental research questions before.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've lost the context of what I might have been saying. Never mind. Okay, let me off the hook. Thanks.
Okay, I think it's time to. If there are no more questions, I think we have to finish this webinar with a big thank you and applause for Professor Moore. Thank you very much for offering this this very, very nice talk. Thank you also to the assistants. Remember that we have more talks on March, April, and May, and possibly in June also. So Thank you again, and bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Herman.